So we have a packed meeting tonight. We are already scheduled to end overtime, so we are going to really try as much as possible to stay within our time for this evening. We have, at the beginning, an open session, then we will be moving into executive session and back into open session that will reopen with public comment and some further presentations. But getting us started, we have the calendar and our consent agenda. Helen, did you want to talk specifically about the change orders? It's quite a high.
Do you want to do the calendar first?
Oh, sure.
Well, I just get myself together.
Yes.
Did you want to do the calendar?
It's not up yet. Oh, there it is. So here we are. So we have the calendar. We have a lot of subcommittees coming up. Town meeting, as everyone knows, will begin on November 19th. From what I've heard, it is expected to last for 4 evenings. So at least so much fun to happen. So for those members who are on town meeting, and then we will also have a number of representatives from school committee who will be there at various points during town meeting as well. And then we have some other fun activities, not that town meeting's not lots of fun for more than 4 nights, but we also have the BEF Spelling Bee on the 17th, Innovation Fund has an event, the BEF Trivia Bee, oh, here's Susan. Hi, Susan. So we need to announce. So we have Susan Wolf-Dickoff, who's participating remotely because she is unavailable. We don't have to do roll call or anything for general session, right?
Yes, for votes.
Oh, we do. For votes.
Yes.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you. Our council is present, so we are able to get excellent advice on all of these. Susan, we're just doing the consent agenda right now. All right. We have the calendar. Anything on the consent agenda?
So I'd like to explain the 2 pieces of the Coolidge Corner renovations and additions, the settlement agreement. As some of you may know, or may not know, there were some issues, as there are in every project, at the end of the project, in terms of what the contractor feels we owe them and what we feel that we owe them. And oftentimes there's a big delta between the two, as there was here, and Mr. Quigley very skillfully negotiated this to an $898,155 agreement. The agreement is, in it there's pages and pages. We have here, I think you have some of it, correct? Having to do with winter conditions, having to do with different issues that came up, whether it was soil contaminants that needed to be removed and the amounts. If people want more detail, we can certainly have Mr. Quigley go into it, but my sense is that this is a fair agreement that he came to with them. It's within, actually we're still somewhat under budget in this project from what we budgeted originally, so I would recommend that we approve this settlement with Shawmut. It requires them, they have not finished all their work. They're still working on some of the issues, and those are listed here in the agreement. And if they don't do those, the agreement is void. So that would be what I would recommend. Are there any questions?
Yes.
Oh.
Yeah.
Ms. Fetterspiel and then Ms. Monopoly.
Go ahead.
Yeah, Helen, can you just talk a little bit about the heating and the cooling? We heard that yesterday at the
Sure.
listening
So
session.
one of the issues that came up with the heating system was over the garage there was not good enough insulation, and so the garage made that wing where the classrooms are above the garage cold, and so we have since then hired a company who put in insulation, put in heating system. When we originally built put it out for bids, we only got 1 bid, and so they rebid it and were able to do it this fall. So that's part of what's happening. There's also the issue in every project that we have, the heating system and the balancing of it is always an issue. I see Mr. Glover shaking his head. We have yet to go into a building where it works perfectly from the beginning. And it takes time, it takes a lot of energy, and this system is a new system, so I think it's taking even longer than usual. I don't know if that answers your question or not.
Yeah, I mean, it does. It's just that we're in our second year at the
Yes.
school. Oh, so
Yes.
it was a little alarming to hear that some rooms were way too cold and some rooms were way too hot.
Correct, and I have not had a chance yet to talk to Mr. Quigley about it. I know he's on vacation, but when he gets back, and I'm sure that he has gotten these comments, but I will bring it up with the building commission at their next meeting and with him to see, what they're doing and why it's taking so long. So I'll try and get an answer.
Do we
for you.
withhold some money until all of that's resolved?
So there is, even in this, there's money being withheld.
But I think,
I
though,
think-
that's not, are we hiring a separate company that's different from the settlement agreement, or that
Yeah,
is?
that was separate.
so-
That was
just
separate.
to
It was
clarify,
out of the funds for the project, but it was separate because what we initially got was
Not up to what we
not
were
up to,
what
yeah.
expected.
Well, it was too much. I mean, the cost was too high. So they bid it out as two separate contracts for the installation and for whatever heating system they had to put in there. You're not,
Well, I just wanted to clarify, it's
I'm just-
not within the settlement agreement.
Not within the
it's not
settlement.
within the settlement agreement.
Is that, but who's
the
accountable for
HVAC
making that
systems-
work? Is that an additional cost to us? That's what I'm confused about. If they didn't do it right, whoever they are.
Right, that was it's not, that part I can't tell you for sure. I know that there was an issue between as there usually is, everybody going like this, between the architect and the contractor and what was included in the original. I mean, they built it to specifications. The specifications didn't work.
Okay.
I mean, I can try and get more information, or we can have Mr. Quigley come and talk about it. Maybe that might be best when he gets back.
And maybe even at Capitol, and then if
Yeah,
Capitol
we can do
has-
it at
If you do it
Capitol.
at
That would be a
Capitol
good
and then
idea.
report back here, that'd be helpful.
Sure.
Thank you.
Sure, no problem.
Okay. So I think maybe, do you want to have?
Wait a minute, no, but-
Ms. Monopoly, a different question?
Sure.
I guess I just wanted to echo my concerns, like if we paid for a particular product and we're not getting heating and cooling balanced, I'm not sure we should foot the bill for that if that's not part of this.
They're paying, you'll see, there's a punch list and there's.
Yeah, I
all
saw
sorts
that,
of-
like the green screen, which was delayed. We heard about that last
Yes.
year, and some other punch list items and the gates and HVAC, but these are very specific. I'm talking about like if the building isn't heating and cooling the way that we want, that we intended for it to be built, I'd like some clarification about why,
Okay,
why it's not functioning. We've paid a lot of money for it, so that would be good.
yeah. I mean, I think
Oh,
it,
my original, sorry, I was just adding on to Ms. Fetishwood. I just wanted to clarify that I'm reading this right. So this punch list, we're withholding this percentage as a retainer for this punch list being what I would call a punch list, the larger list, being done. And that is anticipated to be completed by November 30th of this year, with the exception of the flooring, which will be no later than April because it needs to be done on break. Am I understanding it right? Okay, thank you.
any other questions?
Okay, was there a question in the back of the room? Did Casey have a question?
So we'll need 5 signatures on this once we get done with it.
Okay.
Okay.
Do we want to vote them separately tonight with all the questions, or do you want to go ahead
Go on
and do
with
them?
the second one, as you wish.
Let's vote these separately tonight. So we'll go ahead and vote the Coolidge Corner renovation and additions for the change order
The settlement
32, the settlement agreement for change order 32 in the amount of $898,155.01. So I'm going to make a motion. Is there a second that we approve that?
Second.
All right. Further discussion? All of those in favor?
No,
Oh,
roll call.
roll call because, yes. Ms.
I'm going to abstain because I feel I don't have sufficient information about who's paying for what, and 898,000 is a significant sum.
Yes.
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 So via a vote of 8 to 0 to 1, that motion passes. Then we have a motion for, you also have an item related to a change order for the high school. If you could provide us with some information, that's a change order in the amount of $19,556,005.
So this is the preliminary bidding that went out for subcontractors for electrical, HVAC, plumbing, fire protection, and masonry. And what my understanding is, and Ms. Ditkoff, you can help me if you like, this is the change order for $19,556. It's the pre-GMP amendment, and it includes electrical, HVAC, plumbing, fire protection, and masonry, all of which I think came in close to or under budget of what it was estimated. The one piece that they are still working on is the miscellaneous metals, which came in much higher. All three bids came in much higher. And so they've decided to go back and relook at the architect and the contractor, why that is. I think, and Ms. Ditkoff, you can tell me if I'm wrong, what they are experiencing is almost a 10% increase in subcontractors' bids, that the market, they aren't getting as many bids, and the market is very hot. Yes. Yes. Yeah. It's
Not just, well, I think we had also heard, we heard a little at our joint meeting on Monday night as well, but I think it's not just demand, and Ms. Ditkoff, you might be able to provide more information, but it's also that they're finding that because of the urban location, that it's not, the ability to get competitive bids for this project, and the architect was, one of the architects was saying, for example, that they're seeing for projects in the middle of nowhere, they're getting lots of bids with no problem. But for another project that they've seen in another city setting, they're also having trouble getting competitive bids. So
but Skanska was saying, actually, they reached out to some of their competitors to see about what's happening, you know, in the market in general. And they're saying that there's just so much construction going on in eastern Massachusetts that it is really hard to get people to even bid on. And so if you get two bids, you're doing well.
I just want to quickly connect that to the Driscoll project, proposed Driscoll project, because I gave a presentation to the select board on Tuesday night and explained some of the similar issues that we're experiencing at the high school, which are having impact on the cost of the high school because bids aren't as competitive as we would have hoped for. That same dynamic will happen at Driscoll as well, we expect, because we don't, I wouldn't say we, but our consultants and owner's project manager who are working across many projects expect this competitive market to continue. So it's not only affecting the cost of this change order example for the high school, but we expect it to also escalate the cost of Driscoll as
well. Ms. Ditkoff, was there anything you wanted to add to this?
No, just that there was a pretty exhaustive line-by-line review of the budget, and there were dozens and dozens of these items, and so they were analyzed by, first of all, what was over and by how much, so like which of the trades were getting high percentages over, and then what did that translate to in terms of dollar amounts, because sometimes it would be a high percentage over, but it was a low dollar amount. And then there was a third analysis about which of them might be worth rebidding, meaning if it's a market condition and everyone's experiencing expensive concrete or whatever, there was maybe limited value in rebidding it. But if there's something about our scope or our specifications, then there may be more value in trying to figure that out. So we actually asked them to go for the higher priority items, and there were several dozen of these. We asked them to go line by line and tell us where are there places where if we made scope changes and redid it, we might be able to see something that was substantially different. And then sort of on top of that, we sort of asked where are places where it would impact the timeline or other pieces of the project. So there was a pretty comprehensive analysis that we've gone through with Skanska and Hill and Ron all working together. And there are going to be continued conversations about this because I think we're about 60% of the way bid out, maybe a little bit more. By the end of the year, we'll have a much, much better sense. But we were asking questions like, is this an overage because of how much of this is attributable to the market, to our scope, to what's going on? So all that analysis is being done to identify spots where there's potential for rebid. So I just want people to know the level of depth that we're going into to do what we can, because again, pretty substantial, 10% is a lot, and it's going to mean scope changes that are going to be unpopular when we get there. So I just want people to be prepared for that.
Ms. Ditkoff, to follow up on that, do you have a sense that we will be able to manage the 10% increase by scope changes in value engineering, or is there?
Well, I mean, value engineering, so it's, at some point it's a spectrum from value engineering to a scope change. So value engineering is oftentimes, can you use a cheaper tile, or can you use linoleum, drywall instead of tile off the walls? Drywall is less durable, but it's less expensive than tile. So there's some things that truly are value engineering. Then there's a whole set of things which are scope changes, like we are doing substantially less work on the third floor above the high school than we had initially wanted to. And so those kinds of decisions, I mean, you can't value engineer or tile or finish your way out of a 10% change. So there are going to be scope reductions, and I think that's the thing that's going to come back to the high school building committee and it'll come back to us to take a look at.
Thank you. All right. Any further questions on this change order? All right. So I'll make a motion that we approve the change order in the amount of $19,556,005.
I'll second.
All right. We'll do a roll call vote.
Yes.
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 And then we did have one other item on our two other items on our consent agenda, the past record from the October 17th meeting, and also a trip application for the Model UN Conference. Do we have a motion for those? I will make a motion for those items. Do we have a second? Mr. Perlman, thank you. Any questions or discussion on those two items? All right. Ms. Coyne, if you would do roll call.
Yes.
Abstain.
Yes.
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 Yes. So we do have something under new business that we have, that I'll bring up now as we're doing the consent agenda, is that we also have an item for approval, which is what, Mr.?
So it's in your packet, and it was meant to be on the agenda. I'm not sure, I think there's a typo, I'm not quite sure, but it's the possible vote to approve the Advanced Placement Science Memorandum of Agreement with the Brookline Educators Union.
Later on?
Oh, was that, okay, yeah, that's what I'm at, yeah, I'm sorry. I'm just trying to.
Oh, it is later on?
Okay, all right.
Okay,
Okay, great, thank you. Just want to make sure I thought it was on the agenda and didn't want to miss it.
great. All right, so that will bring us to our student report.
Okay, perfect. Over the past couple of weeks, I've explored the Brookline High activist community and have tried to grasp a better understanding of the BHS handbook and the legislative process. School committee meetings and public comment have given me a lot of perspective on the issues important to adults in the BHS community, and I was curious about student perspectives. I've spoken to several club leaders, a few teachers, and members of the Brookline Sagamore about news coming out of Town Hall. Two central issues have emerged, the BSSCC controversy and Brookline gas infrastructure. As we know well from public comment, BHS teachers still feel strongly about BSSCC, and the Brookline Sagamore wrote their front page article on the school committee for October 17th. The article was published online and printed a little while later, and the Sagamore is a fantastic paper and is read widely by BHS students. Usually when topics are written about in the Sagamore, they're widely discussed, but I didn't really hear students talk much about the October 17th meeting. I think it's highly possible that the article was overshadowed by this massive sort of uniting of the BHS activist community to promote electric infrastructure. A few weeks ago, news on a warrant article about electric infrastructure going to town meeting reached a couple of Brookline High seniors, and they decided to sort of educate their community about fracking, natural gas, and electric infrastructure. The Food Justice Club, Amnesty International Club, the Environmental Action Club, and the Global Leadership Club worked together to organize a series of events throughout Brookline. It was incredibly exciting to see so many of my peers work together for a common goal. I met with several club leaders and attended one of their events in Coolidge Corner. It was a fantastic experience, and all the club leaders are looking forward to seeing what else comes out of their partnership. Jacob Gervis reported on the event in Coolidge Corner for the Brookline Tab. I just wanted to say how kind the Brookline Tab has been to Brookline High clubs. They have offered a town-wide platform for BHS clubs to spread their message, and we're incredibly grateful. I also attended 2 student legislature and student council meetings, and there's been a push from the 2 new legislature chairs, English teacher Peter Sedlak and senior Max Siegel, to streamline the bill writing process. I read a bit of the student handbook, and the rules around procedure for legislature seem relatively arbitrary, and hopefully the new amendments will clear it up. The ideas are popular on members because a common complaint that legislature gets from the majority of the BHS community is that they get little done. And the bill has faced a small amount of pushback from a few faculty members, but it will likely easily pass next week. I also attended a student council meeting. Beforehand, I didn't realize how much they did for the school, but their various subcommittees ensure that the needs of students at both campuses get what they need. A central goal of student council this year will be revamping club funding to ensure that student groups are supported. They're given around $8,000 each year to give to Brookline High clubs, but in the past, money has gone unused or misused for things like snacks and merchandise. Hopefully, the new process will be used to better connect student council and our various clubs. Thank you.
We appreciate the update, and then also all of the time that you put into attending these other meetings and reaching out to other student leaders at the high school. I think that that's a great perspective, and we appreciate it. Anything else? All right, that will bring us to Mr. Lemus with a presentation and discussion on our FY 2020 and FY 2021 budgets.
Okay, good evening, folks. So you've asked me and Ms. Norman to give you an update on both our current budget and future budgets, as well as some of the drivers of those budgets, our main drivers of the budgets, and also impact of potential personnel salary increases. So I'm going to go over a number of things, and I ask for your complicated information only for you and me, but also for the general public. And we're sharing with you tonight more information sort of concentrated together than we have in the past. And we're going to go through budget update and background, so sort of where we are in our budget, how we got here. Okay, we're going to be sharing with you some of the primary driver of PSB's budget, which is the personnel costs. And we're going to dig more deeply into that than typically municipalities go, just to make sure you understand why our personnel costs increase significantly every year. Then we're going to go into the last few years and what was done to manage the deficits we faced every year. Much of that information hasn't really been shared in detail because we've been able to manage it internally. So tonight we're going to sort of shine a spotlight on that. That's leading up to the very significant concern that we're anticipating some serious cuts for the FY 2021 budget. And we're making sure you know about this ahead of time, you and the community. Later tonight I'll communicate with all our staff about it. So we can begin planning now, and indeed if we do need to make significant cuts, we can be planful about them, thoughtful about them, and not be making them sort of by the seat of our pants in February, March. I'll talk to you a little about the work we're doing already to plan for the necessary cost savings. And then we'll just touch briefly on something else you asked me to discuss tonight, which is proposed increase in personnel costs and their impact on the budget. And then finish by steps that can be taken. So I'll go for a while, then I'll pause, and then go for a little while longer, and just bear with us here. So the overall message here tonight for all of you and the community at large is that the public schools of Brookline has made significant cuts during the last 3 fiscal years to balance our budget. Okay, I'll explain those as we go forward. PSB will continue to face financial difficulties in the upcoming years. There are some extra presentations. I'm sorry. Oh, yeah, I did actually. Can you just help using that?
Yeah, I have it. Thank you.
So just to, again, PSB has made significant cuts during the last 3 fiscal years to balance our budget each year. And I'll explain those. PSB will also continue to face financial difficulties in the upcoming years, and we'll describe some of those as well, and the causes behind them. So just first of all, how do we get here? I want to go back to 2018 override, because that's really where this story begins. If you remember, PSB requested at that point, over 3 years, $9.8 million. That's what we anticipated our expenses would increase over 3 years in terms of personnel, other expenses, contract services, and the like. The voters approved $8.3 million over 3 years. At the same time, since then, and including FY21, we anticipate even less than that in terms of revenue garnered through the override, $7.4 million. So what's important to realize is from our original plans and expectations prior to 2018, PSB is actually receiving $2.4 million less than our projected funding over the course of 3 years. Okay, so immediately as we get into this, each year we've received less revenue than we anticipated, and that will be especially the case in FY21. We expect. So other matters that in addition to revenue, other matters that have impacted our budgets each year and over the course of the last 3 years. One, personnel. So Brookline does have and continues to remain committed to maintaining highly competitive personnel salaries, despite the slower growth in town revenue we've experienced over the last few years. Okay, and also what's important about that is annual growth in personnel costs have been outstripping our annual growth in revenue. I'll show that to you as well. In special education, we have mandated increases for in-district, out-of-district in-district costs, out-of-district tuition, contracted services, and also transportation that were larger than expected. Okay, and then also in our enrollment growth, we've maintained efforts on enrollment growth, especially the last couple of years, to maintain our low student-staff ratios. That's been a priority. It remains. It also continues to be a challenge affecting the budget. So just a little more background here in terms of what makes up our budget. So as you see in the slide, in this pie chart, these are our basic categories in terms of how we budget. Personnel, services, supplies, capital, and then other expenses. What's important to get across here is the major driver of our budget is and will continue to be our personnel costs. That's typical in any organization. In PSB, 87% of our expenditures are allocated to personnel. This is just presenting that same information in just a little easier read to format. What's notable is, in terms of our overall budget, $104 million is in personnel. The total of the other 4 categories amounts to about $15 million. So as we'll talk about tonight, if we're facing significant cuts or looking for cost savings, At this point, because we've cut the other areas, it's difficult to find, it'll be harder to find cost savings or cuts in services, supplies, capital, and other areas. That's going to be a challenge we all face together. So $104 million, or 87% of our costs are in personnel, about $15 million, or 13.2%, I think I did the math right, of our costs are in things, items other than personnel. So I want to dig into personnel costs in a little deeper way because it's our primary budget driver. As I said, 87% of our costs are in personnel. So this is the breakout between different categories of staff. All right. So Unit A, which is teachers, is 72% of our staff. This is where I really need my glasses. Hold on. Paraprofessionals, about 9.6% of our personnel costs. Non-aligned district staff, that means everything from Brookline Adult and Community Education, deputy superintendents, principals, human resource staff, other confidential staff. That's 5.7% of our personnel costs. Our Unit B, which is administrators, vice principals, coordinators, directors, that's 4.8% of our personnel costs. Our secretaries are 2.6%, custodians 2.5%, and then intern stipends and substitutes account for 2.2%. All told, in terms of our unionized personnel, 95.2% of our personnel costs are compensation for our union colleagues and professionals. That's in both BEU and AFSCME. Some of the factors that go into our personnel costs. There's three primary components of our personnel costs and our annual increases. The cost of living adjustment. This is just a rough number, but essentially 2% in our last contracts was the salary increase for every year of employment in terms of the cost of living adjustment. That isn't exactly 2%. It's around 2% because, for example, as I'll show you, in one of our years we had a 1% adjustment in the beginning of the year and the 2% adjustment halfway through the year, which obviously amounts to more than 2% salary COLA. Another very important area, which is often sort of either isn't understood that well, even among employees in schools, not necessarily just Brookline, but other places, and also certainly towns and municipalities and community members, are the steps. Steps means you get an additional step in the salary scale for every year of service, every year you've been teaching or working for the district. Typically, each step is worth about 3 to 5% each year, okay? And then and our employees get steps until they reach the top step, which is 15 or 17 years, depending if you're a paraprofessional, administrator, or a Unit A member. Another detail about the steps, which isn't commonly understood, is that teachers who accumulate 7 years of service qualify for an additional one-time adjustment through a double step. So just for example, and I'll show this to you later, if you worked as a teacher in Brookline for 7 years, you're on the 7th step. Okay, if you started at step 0 or step 1, I should say. After your 7th year, you would jump to the 9th step. You'd skip the 8 steps, go directly to the 9th step. That happens even if you start after 5 years. If you come to Brookline on the 5th step because you've been teaching somewhere else, after 7 years, you'd skip a step. So after your 12th step, then you go to 14, sort of thing. I can answer a question with that if that's not. And then lanes, the other piece. Lanes are acquired or accumulated depending on your degree level. So bachelor's or master's plus 30, master's plus 60, doctorate. Those give you different lane on the salary scale. Okay, if you move from one lane to another, that's typically around a 10% salary increase for that 1 year alone, but then you're in that new lane. So all of these adjustments are negotiated by yourselves and the appropriate union, either BEU or AFSCME. They are agreements that are essentially agreed upon, by the community, yourselves being representatives of the community and the union. So I just want to talk about who qualifies for these various annual salary increases. As you see, all employees qualify for COLA, and those are negotiated, as I said. Non-aligned staff is agreed upon and voted upon by the school committee alone, because those folks aren't represented by a union. In terms of the steps, which is each year of service, each year of work in PSB, that's available to our BU members as well as AFSCME as well, colleagues. And then lane changes are available to Unit A teachers, and then Unit B, which are administrators, VPs, coordinators, directors, and other educational leaders. So just digging down a little bit deeper on personnel costs here, I want to show you some examples of what this means. Because typically when we talk about contracts in municipalities, Brookline or any other municipality, and collective bargaining agreements, we often talk about the COLA increases very publicly. So you might hear about a 2%, 2%, 3%. That's a 3-year contract with a paraprofessional unit or perhaps a teacher's unit, and there's a 2% COLA the first year of a 3-year agreement, a 2% COLA the second year of the agreement, and then maybe a 3%. Okay, those percentages vary community to community, contract to contract. Okay, what isn't often typically understood is how the different approaches here, different components add up on any given employee's salary. So, and that's why we want to explain that, because it isn't typically understood, but it is a substantial impact on our personnel cost every single year. So we'll give you some examples. We'll start with an early career teacher. This is a 3rd-year teacher with a master's degree. We almost always hire, not almost always, or hire teachers with a master's degree. In year 4, they receive a 4 so going from their 3rd year to the 4th year, they would increase their salary by 4.3% from the 3rd year to the 4th year because of their step. They have earned 1 year of additional service. They received in our latest contract an additional 1% salary increase on September 1, and then an additional 2% on the 92nd day or halfway through the school year. Okay.
Just want to clarify, is it 2% on the 92nd day, or it was 1%? 2%? Okay. So it says an additional 2% on the 92nd day? So it's 1% and they received an additional 2%? Yes?
The table.
Yes.
Salary table goes
All
to 1%,
increases.
and then the salary table goes to 2%, and then that gets adjusted as their pay. So the base rises.
I'm sorry, I just thought that the last contract was negotiated where it was 1% on September 1 and an additional 1%. So the total. Okay.
So that results, for this one teacher, okay, or this sample teacher, in a 7.5% annual salary increase. Okay, and you can see the numbers there. And those numbers aren't for a specific person; those are what our salary tables show. Okay. So let me continue with another example. This is a mid-career sort of teacher after the 7th year. And this shows you the impact of a double step. In year 8, when they went from the 7th year to the 8th year, they received a 3.7% salary increase through the steps, because that would move to the step 8. But in this case, they moved to step 9 because it's double step after the 7th year of service. Sort of. This usually qualifies for additional 3.5 salary increase on top of the 3.7. And then again, the COLA, just as described in the previous slide, that results in a 10.6% annual salary increase. So you can see this particular example, the teacher would go from $74,000 to just almost $82,000 in annual salary. And then this is a later career, and this is significant. You'll see this is significantly different. In the 18th year, say a teacher is in the 18th year with a master's degree, moving to year 19, they're already at the top step. There isn't a 19th or 20th step, okay? So they don't receive a salary increase through the steps. They do, of course, receive the COLA, which is the same as other folks. That results in a 3% annual salary increase from one year to the next, in terms of $96,000 to $99,000, and you'll see the net change there as well. And then the last one is still a lane change. So a 9th year teacher with a master's degree, in year 10, they move up to a different lane, because they'll go from master's degree, in this case the master's plus 30, which means 30 course credits. They receive a 5.1% through the lane change. So instead of just on the master's lane, they're now moved up to the master's plus 30 lane. They have moved from the 9th year to the 10th year, which is, of course, a step. That's 3.3% salary increase. And they receive the COLA as well. So their annual increase is 11.9%. Okay? And you can see the numbers down below. So we're sharing that with you just to educate you, but also educate the community that about how our personnel costs increase year to year. Okay? Every teacher, every BU member, teacher, and administrator receives similar approaches depending where they are in terms of their years of service and also their degree level as well. Any questions on that? Okay. Now I'm going to get into impacts of or the sort of what we've been doing with the budget the last few years in order to balance the budget each year. So $2.5 million, we've had $2.5 million in total reductions over the past 3 years in order to make the balance of budget as we close each year. So going back to FY 2018, towards the end of 2018, we realized that there were a number of unbudgeted personnel costs, meaning they were planned, they had been happening in the past, but they weren't budgeted for in the sense that they weren't identified in the budgeting process. Okay, they've been and that came through through the sort of, how do I say this? What we were doing at the time is what we call ad comp, or additional compensation forms. And as those came through, or new positions were added, or stipends that were being done previously that weren't really in the document, the budget, came through, we realized as we were heading towards the end that we actually totaled $1.3 million in unbudgeted personnel costs. Some of these were new costs that year. Some were carried forward from before, but weren't on the budget, even though people had been doing those positions, like stipended positions or others positions, for perhaps years. Okay, but they actually weren't being documented in the planning of the budget itself. Okay, that led to a $475,000 end-of-year deficit. In order to cover that deficit, this money was borrowed from FY 2019 accounts, including special education and benefit reserves. Okay, it also reappropriated from state chapter 70 funds in 2019, and also required cuts in unspent expense line items. Okay. That was all done through town meeting and through the school committee, all approved by you, but it just isn't commonly sort of known that we actually had to make some difficult choices here towards the end of FY 2018 and into FY 2019. Okay, so we just want to be clear about it because this is part of the story of how we got to where we are. FY 2019, some similar things. So if you remember, in this year we had $1.3 million of unbudgeted personnel costs. They weren't on the budget, even though the vast majority of those had been spent in prior years. At that point, you need to carry them forward, okay, into the FY 2019 budget. All right. Remember, the budget's completed before this time. Before the FY 2019 budget is completed before the time we're figuring this out here. Okay. So we have to carry those forward because there are jobs that and there are work people are doing, and will continue to do in FY 2019. That caused those numbers. We also had to account for the food services deficit that accumulated over years from revolving funds. There was an annual deficit every year in the food services revolving fund account. At this point, we chose to essentially pay down that deficit, okay, from FY19. Again, unplanned costs that were learned about during the course of that year. That led to, on the right-hand side, those issues that were that came up during or as part of the process in during FY 2019 led to a budget freeze from January through April, if you all remember, a $1.3 million cut in expense accounts to cover the $1.3 million then needed in the personnel accounts. Okay. There was identified where we had $1.3 million in unidentified personnel costs in FY 2018. We got that down to $300,000 the following year. That's progress in terms of proper and planned budgeting. We also then had to redirect some circuit breaker costs, and then also required cuts in unspent expense items again. Okay. These are choices that are happening during the school year based on things that are coming up either during the school year or discovered or found out after the budgeting process. And in FY 2020, we'll talk about this quite a bit, but that first bullet there on the left, net revenue that was available to PSB was $514,000 less than projected prior to the budgeting process. Okay. We also increased unexpectedly the out-of-district tuition cost by $826,000, and also chose to move $416,000 of the athletic department costs to the operating budget. They had not been in the operating budget where they needed to be, and we made a difficult decision to do that, to get them in the proper place and properly budgeted, so they could be included in the operating budget year after year. That amounts to, if you have less $540,000 less in revenue, and then increase in unanticipated costs by $826,000 and $416,000, that equals $1.8 million in unexpected costs. So we need to cut planned spending, including new teacher positions, supplies, materials, transportation, professional development, and also some personnel adjustments to account for that lower revenue. Yeah, shit's fine, yeah.
So when we were talking about the athletic department and that resolving fund, how you were talking about it made it sound a little optional. Was that an optional choice that we had, or could we have decided to maintain that as a deficit?
No, you could not have maintained it as a deficit. Part of what had been happening is that the deficits of the athletic revolving fund had been absorbed by the operating budget over the years and not necessarily highlighted and disclosed. And it got 400, when it's 50,000, that's one thing, but when you're at 400,000 in large numbers, as such, where you had the majority of your staff, your director, your coaches being funded by fees, which weren't really funding the program, an adjustment needed to be made in which the school committee values the athletic department and needs to put money where it values its programs.
Thank you, Mel. So that brings us to 2021. At this point, we're anticipating that we will likely have to make $3.5 million in reductions of planned expenses, planned costs. I want to show you the next few slides why this is. At this point, these are anticipated. They may not pan out just this way because we don't know a revenue number exactly, but we're trying to both get clear on what to plan for and begin planning for it. One of your budget guidelines, I think it's the first one, is the open and transparent with clear information about the budget in order to make thoughtful and wise strategic decisions. So that's essentially, in many ways, the purpose here. So just to remind you, I showed this earlier, but just to remind you, because this does go back to the override and some of the planning on the original override. Just again, there's a $2.4 million variance between what was requested by us originally and what was actually received, okay? Because even what was approved by voters, we're receiving less than that in terms of revenue from the override. In addition, this year, the revenue that we're getting from the override is particularly at risk. In the prior years, meaning last two fiscal years, this fiscal year in FY19, the override revenues relied on the
She'll help us.
Can you find 3.5 million?
Nice, right? The past 2 years, the revenue from the override relied on the property tax levy. This year, by design, the override is relying on less dependable sources of revenue, such as marijuana sales, new hotel, and other development and parking fees. None of those are panning out as hoped for. Marijuana sales obviously still in limbo, but it looks like much of that, if not all of it, will be going to sort of health and mitigation. The new hotel is not developing as fast as anyone hoped, and other development as well, and the parking fees are lower than expected. This just helps you understand sort of some of the details behind these numbers I'm talking about. Look at the top line first. You see the levels of revenue we got from the property tax levy in FY29. It was $2 million. In FY22, FY 2020, the revenue that the PSB received from tax levy was $3.1 million. This year, for the upcoming year, FY21, that goes down to $389,000, okay? That's what we project it will be now. It will be different than that. It won't be exactly that. It could be less, could be more. There is a significant risk because of the factors I told you before, that could be less than that. That is made up with the non-property tax revenue, marijuana, fees, development, and growth. Now, the total number there isn't far off from earlier years, particularly FY 2019. But the fact that this number is so large puts us at risk. Okay, means that we can't expect necessarily to have this number, and we need to plan for a lower number. Okay.
When you're saying so what's built into the 3.5? This is the number built into 345, and it could be worse, or you're saying that this?
So I'm trying to build out two things. The first part is the risk we have in revenue, and then I'll talk about the risk we have in cost, and together they equal 3.5. Okay, that make sense?
Well, I'm just not sure how much of the risk you've already accounted for. So you're saying that it's a possibility that the revenue we receive could be lower. The 3.5 number, though, is based on this revenue assumption.
Yes, that's right.
Okay, so we could need more than 3.5 million. Is where the risk. Okay, I just want to make sure. Yep.
Yes. So in terms of $3.5 million, first it comes from, where did this number come from? First it comes from the lower revenue projections. So we're expecting $583,000 less than was originally planned for in the override. Okay, and I'll detail these in a moment. Additional expenses from personnel costs and mandates, okay, to the tune of almost $1 million. We restore costs to address enrollment growth, $700,000, okay, and then some unplanned strategic investments. I'll detail those, which is $1.2 million. So let me just go into detail about each one of those. We talked about revenue already. That's the number that we expect lower than expected, okay. In terms of additional expenses from personnel costs and mandates, so these are tuition budget increases for special education, legal services connected to those, and then also no changes in step adjustments or benefits reserves. Can you explain that to me? Can you just explain that, Marilyn? The last line.
So we had, part of balancing the budget, we had cut the benefits reserve account. That's the account that we fund additional FTEs and health insurance, and we have to reconcile with the town in November about those funds. In 19, we used those funds to fund, by town meeting appropriation, the FY18 deficit. And so we need to plan for any FTEs in that regard. So step adjustments is, probably should say the salary adjustment. So we're, the salary savings account. So we had, part of the original override budget plan was that we had a salary savings number of $675,000. We had increased that in both 19 and 20 to $800,000. We set that back to $675,000. We're just barely getting to $800,000 with turnover and savings. So we pulled that back. So that has an impact on the original plan.
In terms of addressing enrollment growth, part of this, the plan here that we've had is to hire 18 FTEs of teachers to maintain classroom ratios. 15 have been planned, 3 have not been funded. So the question, so what we're trying to do here is get those 3, back into the budget. So last year, in order to balance the budget, we did not fund 3 of those teachers. Okay, and we're hoping to do that again this year and restore those cuts. And then increase transportation services for special education and a new contract for regular transportation. We expect that new contract to go up. And then unplanned strategic investments. So funds for Office of Educational Equity. It's a small amount. We are anticipating restoring expense budgets and professional development day that have been cut earlier, as I detailed in FY 19 and 20. And then also we have operations costs that will be moving from the CIP to the operating budget for our leased buildings. Clark Road significantly, the Temples to a much lesser degree. And that includes also building repair and maintenance of those properties as well. Those will be moving from the CIP to our operating budget.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. As I said, it's complicated.
Those costs
No,
moving from
Off the top.
the CIP, because there isn't enough funding in the CIP to fund the total cost of the leases, to fund DPW, Parks, Building Department, and IT for their ongoing expenses for supporting Clark Road and the temples, and under the premise that the square footage that we have at 2 Clark Road is not going to be reduced anytime soon. If we actually replace that, we will be replacing that building and replacing that square footage. And so we're trying to avoid what happened with the opening of Coolidge Corner School, where we sort of had a surprise of needing $200,000 to for the building department to operate that building for utilities and repairs. And so we're trying to make sure that we don't run into that in the future. So, and an additional $100,000 to keep the public building department school accounts that he supports. There are contract increases and the like, and so 100,000 of that number is for that department's normal increases.
And then, just on the unplanned part, on that last one, so when we're talking about funds for the Office of Educational Equity, that's something different than Dr. Warnham's. That position was a planned position, and this is something different?
No, we funded the position. We actually didn't fund any supplies, materials, or resources for her to actually execute her duties and responsibilities.
Okay. So I just wanted, we were just having some question about the unplanned part.
Funded a position, but we actually didn't fund the department.
Thank you.
To do anything.
And then I had, before you move on into the different section, there was another question about, if you go back on 27, when you're saying the increase in circuit breaker reimbursements over the original projection, wouldn't that be a plus instead of a minus?
So it nets out. We did not have the increase. Roughly for 21, we will have, from the original plan, circuit breaker from the amount we used at that point was what we received in FY 17 was $1.6 million. As of this week, we're getting close to $1.9 million, just under $1.9 million. So that net increase is about 140,000. We're still finalizing numbers with the state at this point.
Okay.
And appreciate the great job that Linda Kirby and Susie Miller's office does to grab every single penny she can. Because obviously it counts. It's normally, this number would be higher to the point of about $750,000 without her effort and work in that of the department.
So just in terms of concluding this section, since FY 2018, just to recap, we made reductions in non-personal expenses in order to balance the budget. So we had increases in personnel costs and others, and other areas. We also got things off the revolving fund and other debts in order to, and covered those with non-personal expenses. These cuts were short-term and are unsustainable. At this point, we feel we've exhausted all the options to cut expenses through service and supplies. As I described in the very beginning of the presentation, of a $119 million budget this year, $104+ million of that is in personnel, and about $15 million is in all other expenses. So that gap has been getting wider and wider. It's likely any further reductions would involve personnel in some way, shape, or form. So all these factors essentially lead us to anticipate a deficit for FY 2021 even before we begin the budget process. I want to add one more piece to this, or you've asked me to explain one more piece of this to you, which is the current proposal to increase salaries for FY 20, this current year, at a 2% COLA for Unit A, 2% COLA for Unit B, and then $1.25 per hour for paraprofessionals. Because of steps and lanes and compounding and the completion of the 2018 override, the impact of these increases, these proposed increases, is estimated to be far greater than the 2% COLA. And I explained a lot of that, those sort of factors earlier in the presentation. This shows you both the planned personnel budget for FY 2020 through FY 2023. The personnel budget, if we enacted this proposal, and then the, how it increases the anticipated deficit in each year. Those are not cumulative deficits. Those are each individual year. I do want to point out that for FY22 and FY23, there are asterisks, and that's because at that point we're assuming a 2.5% increase in revenue due to the ending the override after FY2021. Again, trying to make sure that all of you know, and the community knows, just be trying to be open about information, open about our possibilities here, and also trying to be responsive to your requests.
With respect to steps and lanes, do you have the distribution of where the educators fall in different steps? And
I asked for that. At a late, I don't know that right now, but we'll get back to you on that, because I think that's an important piece, just in terms of, as I mentioned before, there's a real variance depending where folks are and the number of staff we have at what point in your career. So yeah, I'm sorry I don't have that with you, but we will get it to you. So the question is, how can future budget deficits be addressed? What's the upshot of all this, and what can we do about it? So how could cost savings affect our schools? So class sizes are likely to increase. There's potential for reduction in PSP personnel. Programs could be reduced, consolidated, or eliminated. We could cut or consolidate courses with low enrollment. And we could ensure all teachers have full teaching schedules in alignment with the collective bargaining agreement. None of these are simple or easy. I want to just say that clearly. These would be difficult choices for us to make. As a central office, for schools, for teachers, for our staff, for our school committee, and our community. These are some of the places we could look. So what are we doing now to address the situation and be planful about it? Already, principals, curriculum coordinators, and directors are collaborating together to find cost savings recommendations. What's really important about this is typically in the past, coordinators and principals, especially in the K-8s, sort of work separately on this. They have department budgets, they have school budgets, Even though those interconnect at the school level, PSP does not have school-based budgeting. We're moving towards that, And for better or for worse, this is one of the steps this year in order to get, as we get coordinators, directors, and principals working together to identify possible cost savings, that's a place where they are very much collaborating on school-based budgeting, as we move forward on this. They're already doing that. They're meeting together in small groups, as pairs, individuals, and also as large groups. These recommendations that they come forward for schools, as well as central office, will be reviewed with staff at the school level in December. We still will be working with principals on how to do that well. To not only share their thinking, but also get additional input from staff on the possibilities. Interim superintendent and deputy superintendents will review all cost-saving recommendations from those two, from the principal coordinators, directors, and their school staff. And when necessary, we'll make final recommendations on those. So it's not likely we may not need to do all the recommendations that come forward. We've asked principals as they put together their ideas and coordinators and directors to prioritize things. Which will help us make some choices. But ultimately, those choices would be, we'll be making those recommendations in January. And then also additional steps from here. Proposals and recommendations for cost savings continue to be reviewed by principals, coordinators, directors, and deputy superintendents through December and into January. We'll get a revenue number finalized with the town in December, like we typically do. And then the school committee will get my recommended budget at the end of January. So there's a lot of work to be done between now and then. There's a lot of thinking, a lot of idea generation, some very difficult decisions before we put all that into a recommended budget for you. But we're trying to do it in an open way, in a clear way. And as I'll write to our staff tonight, this information, this news, will cause concern and upset. I understand that fully. But I don't see any other way to do it other than be open about it, be transparent about it, and make sure everyone knows what we're dealing with. So I'm available for questions.
Another question about the work that's being done now with the curriculum coordinators and the principals and the directors. Is there directive to look specifically at the budget for the next year, or are they also being asked to say, and then what more would happen for 2022, 2023 in order to address the 2.6 number and the $4 million deficit numbers?
We haven't, no, we haven't said to look towards FY22. Much of what I'm supposing here, much of what would come forward also has an impact on ensuing years. Mm-hmm. If it's programs, if it's personnel, if it's,
Potential. Well, it does potentially, unless, because some of the cuts that we've made in prior years have been a freeze of that year, or sometimes we've purchased ahead supplies, and so that's why I was just wondering, as you've been giving these directives, what's the look? Is this to say we're going to not do professional development this year, and then we're going to have really awesome professional development, make it a double bang for the buck next year, or is this we'd like you to look at things that are changes that will have year over year?
We haven't given them directive for thinking about year over year,
okay.
Honestly.
Okay.
Like I said, I imagine, in all the proposals, recommendations, ideas that come forward, some will and some won't.
Yes.
And then we'll also need to be thinking about that. I mean, I appreciate your suggestion entirely about, the following year, that sort of thing. And, it's fair to say we need to make some significant impacts on next year's budget and following years. So we can do that as well.
Okay, thank you. I have so many questions. How is it that other people do not have, perhaps? My other question is, on page 21, we say we have a 3.5 number for FY21, and then I don't see that. And then when we look at page 32, 33, 34, maybe 35, about page 35. Oh, that's because that's
summary of it. That's the 3.5 right there.
I see.
Also, just to say, like in these, we organize on the revenue, on the override request, we organize into these buckets: personal costs, enrollment growth, and strategic investments. Okay, so this is how we tried to present it here. Strategic investments. So for example, the Clark Road operating cost and that shift in where those expenses or costs are coming from is underneath that unplanned strategic investment bucket, okay? More to explain things and to help explain them than it is that
Yeah, I actually had a couple. A little while ago, as kind of an exercise anticipating some of this, the committee started thinking about programs and priorities, but we did not get very far in that conversation. It was more brainstorm, just put things down and go back.
Maybe you should be careful.
And I'm not going to say anything specific. But I just wondered where that conversation, if and when we have that, might enter into this process.
So what I'm realizing, as I was drafting my message to staff, to send later tonight, I put something in there that I didn't put in here, which is that you also will be working through the next couple of months to get more detailed information on the budget and our costs in different areas, so then you can also weigh in on your choices, your priorities, your suggestions as well as part of this. And
so that would be like in the December, January time frame.
Right, and so exactly. But what your request is to become better educated in a deeper way on specific areas of the budget, and we'll be doing that. I did put in the presentation, including the communication staff.
And another area of question I have is, are there guidelines at the school level for staffing? For instance, are there guidelines for the number of paras in a school, or for programs, or for the coaches in a school, like a math or literacy coach, or for interventionists? I mean, when I go around to the schools, it feels like there are different numbers, knowing that each school is a different size and each school has a slightly different population. But are there some overriding guidelines, or how is that determined?
There are in some areas, there are not in some areas. So, example, from the 2015 override, there were ratios created in terms of, like, for example, if you add a teacher, this is in the K to 8, if you add a teacher, then what ratio do you get in terms of specialists? So if you add one teacher in a section, then how many like health or art or English language you should also get as well.
Right, right.
So it's clear. In terms of, say, coaches, no. That has been based on, literacy coaches have been based on the rollout of Literacy Collaborative over the years, and that happened in a different way in different schools. You asked about a bunch of things there. I want to see if I can hit on it.
Yeah, paras, interventionists.
When I think of interventionists, I think of specialists, and
I'm trying to distinguish between specialists like art and music and interventionists who do.
Literacy specialists, math specialists.
Yes. So my question to that is then, is that decided at the school level, or is that decided here? So that confuses me.
Sure.
Yeah.
It's typically decided by coordinators. Okay. Sometimes, and you know, to varying degrees, I don't know honestly, because those are individual conversations with principals. But that's budgeted from the coordinator level.
So the coordinator says, I think at Coolidge Corner School, they would need more literacy coaches because they're rolling out a program, but they've already done that at Lawrence, so they don't need as many coaches. I'm just trying to think what the thinking is. How does that work? And then paras, kind of, Casey, the same kind of idea, you know.
Sure. So I can speak to the special education staff because you had asked about
Yeah.
paras and then related service providers. So these are your psychologists, speech therapists, occupational therapists, adaptive PE teachers. That's all based on caseload, which
That
then
would
is
be,
based on what
right.
the population for students in special ed looks like at each school. So if you take a school like CCS that has a TLC program, this is the Therapeutic Learning
Right.
Center, you're probably going to see we have a 1.0 clinician attached to that program because that's the need.
Right.
But in addition, because of the population at the school, we also have 2 full-time school psychologists on top of a 1.0 clinician, which looks different from, let's say, Heath, where there's a less than 1.0 FTE of a school psychologist there. So that differs, but I would say the IEP needs drives that. I'll let Nicole speak to how the other interventionists are.
Sticking with the special education, if we
Yeah.
could for a minute. So sometimes when we're going around listening meetings with the staff, they will say something like, we need more paras. I'm just, that's what they say.
Yeah.
And so I'm wondering what's driving that, how that would happen, who evaluates whether they would really need more paras or something else needs to be done.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So I think based on, this is my 3rd year here, there is a historical context where when schools have experienced difficulty with students with either challenging behaviors
Right.
or really high learning needs, a para was assigned to support that student, either through a shared para, so 2 students share one para, or even a one-to-one para. There are some philosophical pieces here when you think about whether or not a student should have an adult with them throughout their years, pre-K to 12, or should we begin to think about building independence and therefore less reliance? So I think there is the historical context of folks are used to having paras assigned, hired from central office, and then assigned to their schools. And so I think that is a mindset shift that would need to happen that takes some time, as you can imagine, because these paras are also written into students' IEPs, and those are mandated. So we do have to provide those. So that is a heavier lift. We have over 300 paras in the district.
Does that include our kindergarten paras, or is that just special education?
Just
paras?
special education.
Thank you.
All kindergarten classrooms have general ed paras.
Oh, 300 total? Okay.
Oh, is there? Okay.
Yeah, a majority of them are special education paras.
As far as specials, art, music, etc., those have been assigned based on sections at schools, and so if you have X number of sections, because you're a 5-section school, you have to have, X number of art teachers.
That's 1.0 for,
teachers, et cetera. That's pretty much how specials teachers have been assigned. What makes things more challenging, I would say, is that we do share staff between buildings, and so oftentimes scheduling is not optimal for teachers who are traveling between buildings. We spend a lot of money and a lot of FTE, for folks to travel between buildings, and so that does add to the fact that people are not necessarily spending all of their FTE in front of students to no fault of their own, and so we do have to think about that. And the other piece, as far as the need for paras, when you hear from teachers about, like, we need more paras, completely understandable. But at the same time, we have not clearly defined what Tier 1 instruction is, and so what actually should be able to be handled in the classroom that would potentially support 80–85% of students, what does need to be a pull-out, what can be a push-in, what can be, what are the needs around professional development for paras, for teachers, in order to address the needs of the ever-changing population of students. And so we really need to work on that.
and the coaches?
The coaches, they're not at every school, or they're not at every school at the same level. Some schools you'll find that they're, what I've seen happen most regularly is there's an aim to have like a K2 coach, a 3-5 coach, and then a middle school coach. And that's for literacy. For math, there are probably fewer coaches. I'm not 100% sure on how that has rolled out over the years. We have been trying to balance that out so that all schools have coaches, and we need to work on what those numbers look like and what the optimal number is. Is it based on the number of students, or is it based on the number of teachers, and how to make that kind of decision?
Thank you very much.
Thanks for developing this really helpful and informative presentation. As you know, there's a lot we're going to have to be thinking about for a while. One of the things that I'm concerned about, sort of building on what Suzanne said, is that we as a school committee are certainly going to do our best to make sure that we're stewarding the district's resources as in the most responsible way to ensure that the needs of our children are being met. However, as someone who is not a pre-K through 12 educator, I know that I personally have opinions. I have judgments, but I definitely don't have the in-classroom expertise to be making the kinds of determinations that are probably going to be necessary as we move forward with these conversations. I'm also really reluctant to make some of these decisions because one of the things that we have been doing is going to the schools and listening to the teachers, and what we're hearing is really drastic reports of significant gaps that are currently impacting the safety, education, and health of our children right now. And I'm really concerned that we can walk into a budget management process with incomplete information to know where to prioritize our investments and where to prioritize our reductions without having full information. So my question for you, and I understand that this is something that's going to take some time to think about, but I'd like your initial reaction and also perhaps the reaction of the committee, is when we're having these conversations, they can't stop at the level of the principals and the curriculum coordinators. There is too much centralization of prioritization about core educational functions that is happening at a level that is too distant from kids. How are we going to ensure that our educators are speaking to needed investments, needed reductions, needed structural realignments, and also making sure that we are keeping our eye on immediate deficits that are causing active gaps in health, education, and safety for our kids?
I think the core, now, Karen, please correct me if I'm wrong. Your core question is how do we make sure that our educators, or I'll say staff in school because I also think of guidance, I think of, specialists, I don't, so I want to use the term broadly, are involved in and participating in the idea generation, the solution identification, being able to voice what they see as gaps, what they see as needs, that sort of thing, okay? So we expect to be doing that in December. And what I would like and what I'm going to work with the principals on is instead of I think it's often helpful to respond to something, okay? But at the same time, not wanting that something, those ideas to be limiting factors, okay? But as a jumping off point. So that's the intention in terms of having coordinators, curriculum directors, principals do some of this work ahead of time and come up with some possibilities, okay? And then work with staff in December. The challenge we have, and this is actually something that's on a big piece of chart paper in my office these days, the challenge we have in Brookline is we don't have actually very many, we have a desire to include teachers and educators in real decision-making and real participation and collaboration. But we don't have many structures to do that well, much time to do that well. So I don't say that in order to say we won't do it, but whereas in other places it may be possible to say we got this time to do that, it's just not as simple as finding those obvious times in our district. So it's a challenge to us, and I say that not to dismiss it, but just to acknowledge it. And it's something I think actually we need to work on going forward, is how do we have better structures or more time for collaboration among teachers, but also collaboration across levels or across functions, that sort of stuff. So it's something I'll work on with principals, and I've got to figure out with them, because in some ways they can do it differently at each of their schools. How do they engage their staff? But I do want to assure the committee and others that that's something we're really committed to this year. And I don't think it's actually been, I could be wrong with this and happy to be corrected, I don't think it's been done much in the past, at least not since I've been here, in terms of that engagement. So we hope to do that. We will do that.
I just want to follow up. Thank you for that, and I'm glad to hear that that process is moving forward. I want to say in the name of efficiency that sometimes it's worth thinking about the structures that we already have available to us, where principals and their faculty and staff meet regularly, like faculty meetings, as an opportunity for having those conversations. I do want to say that I think it's important to do more than just ensure that that conversation happens, which I think is really important. At the end of the day, we as a school committee own this budget. Every single one of us signs off on it. It is one of our principal duties as elected officials. I know that I, as an elected official, need to actually see what those recommendations are, at least at some level, in order to know that the budget that I'm signing off of, the budget that I'm signing off on, reflects the priorities of our educators. And I also am mindful of the fact that in the context of our school improvement plan process, we also engage very significantly, hopefully, with our parent communities, especially through the school site councils, and that we should be ensuring that our school site councils also are having an important and a meaningful role to play in this process.
So if I could just add, I was going to say the same thing, Sharon, that in some districts, school site councils actually sign off on the budgets for their schools. I don't know our school site councils that well, so I don't know how they're functioning and what roles they've been playing, but that would be an existing structure that may be able to help us think this through.
Yeah, so they are used and have different roles in different buildings, and certainly I agree with you 100% that to make sure that they're included in this process, definitely. That's very important. And yes,
because that will have a parent voice as well,
right?
Yep. As well as teacher.
Yes, definitely in the faculty meetings. What I'm trying to, what I'm thinking of is sort of, yes, definitely faculty meetings. What else can we do? Because especially in December, faculty meetings, I think there's one, perhaps, or two, but that's still a very limited amount of time. And so how is it possible to get additional time, whether it's in smaller groups? I don't know yet, but we work with principals to see if we can get beyond that time. But we'll certainly use that time.
And perhaps at each school they will figure that out.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to say.
Right. We don't have to figure that out for them. The schools can do some of that.
Yes, we're going to do one more question, and then we do have need for executive session.
It's actually more of a comment, so I want to echo the comments that have already been made, and I guess I do have, not a question, I guess it is a question, I'm sorry. Are you going to be sharing this presentation with staff? Tonight, okay. I didn't know if they were going to get just a letter, or if they were going to get, we could refer them to this. I think this will be could be very helpful in helping some people understand the numbers or why we're looking for ways to cut. Why do we need to? There's some questions I've been getting from the community about why do we need to do that if we have an override. So that was passed for certain things, and it's very complex, and I think this is a beginning place for perhaps people to sort of understand what we're looking at financially, and so I think that would be very helpful. So that was my question. And then the other thing I think that would be helpful, in addition to the comments made already tonight, are getting some ideas. Ms. Fetishville asked about the ratios or the guidelines. I was thinking of those ratios, like how do we decide how many staff and sort of to have equity among buildings. It would be good for us to be able to say what our values are and then be able to figure that out in the budget. As far as like when do we decide when a school needs another school psychologist or another counselor? When do we say we need another interventionist? And I do like the idea of the school-based budgeting where we have conversation with staff and educators and coordinators all together as a collaborative conversation about, do we need more interventionists or do we need coaches? Like how many coaches do we need and what is the role of those? I'm just trying to think in like bigger terms, sort of like, do we have enough new teachers that we need a coach? Is that the decision we're making, or do we need more people to work directly with students? I don't know. So just some of those. It would be good to be able to name it and say this is what we value and this is what we're going to do and this is the feedback we're getting and this is how it impacts our budget because this is how many staff we need to do what we say we want to do. I don't know. I do know. I don't know why I said that. I do know.
I think that clarity is important. I will say this, that it's challenging, I don't know how to say this in a way that, it's challenging for Brookline to get that clarity sometimes. Because people often, we're of two minds in many ways. We want clarity and coherence and clear guidelines, and also we want autonomy and flexibility. And those can really work together. One can really give you some guide rails on how to do the other piece as well. Flexibility here, but not in there. So, totally agree with what you said, and just want to acknowledge the complexity of the context. But we've clarified some of that. A few areas. Let's give vice principals, for example. There's a threshold after you get 250 students, and then you hit the next threshold. That's why in some schools we have 3 vice principals, and others we just have 2 or 1. But I agree with you that clarity in other areas both helps schools know that they're staffed equitably, but also helps us make decisions in budgeting. So thank you.
Maybe, I hear what you're saying, and maybe it's a recommended ratio, and then schools decide like we really need to go this way or this way, right? And principals and yeah.
I can speak to also what Ms. Fetishville has been really important, and you've talked about is just the school-based budgeting and how can we have some school-based decisions, but with those guidelines, I think is a nice combination. Thank you.
So we do have need for executive session, so I'm going to make a motion to meet in executive session pursuant to Massachusetts General Laws, Chapter 30A, Section 21A, for the following purposes. Purpose 3, to discuss strategy with respect to collective bargaining with the Brookline Educators Union, BEU, Units A, Unit B, paraprofessionals, if an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the bargaining or litigating position of the public body, and the chair so declares. Purpose 7, to review and approve executive session minutes from the following meetings: October 4th, 2018, October 18th, 2018, October 25th, 2018, November 8th, 2018, September 26th, 2019, and October 2nd, 2019. And so we will do this by roll call.
Yes.
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 Yes?
Yes.
And we will return into open session after our executive session. We expect that to be at 8:50 p.m.
Are we staying here?
No, we're not.
We're five.
We're good.
All we need is five.
I'm gonna get
Sorry.
them all,
Yes.
Susan. Let me get, I'm sorry, thank you for your patience.
Oh, thank you.
You're going to send it to you and Sharon list or something.
I guess I don't know how I did that. Sorry about that. I did sign one of them. I didn't sign the other.
I missed one too.
So wait, so who's missing? Susan isn't signing. Jennifer, this is not, you didn't sign this one, right? This was, yeah, 2, 4, 5. No, there's 4. Yeah, there's no.
So we don't have too much stuff, do we? No. We can do it in an hour, can't we?
We need to, because it's 9.
Yeah.
I'm not staying more than
Maybe we can do it in.
if they come back from wherever they're all.
Yeah, I don't know what that happened to me. It was here. Sorry about this, guys. I think they're all set now.
Excellent, thank you so much.
There was one that was missing some people.
Yeah, that's, I just signed, oops. Huh. Interesting, that's that one. Some other people too missed. 1, 2, 3, 4. It's okay.
We lost our quorum. It's like gathering cats, as they say, herding cats. I said, we were pretty animated with this last conversation, so that's kind of fun.
That's good. That's good.
I'm not sure I won, but I was animated.
That's good.
Passion is important. It's passion.
It's okay? Okay, let's do some, breathe, right, some mindfulness. Well, we can do mindfulness
Well,
right
you know, I'm
now.
actually on day 8 of my,
Oh, you're doing that?
yeah. What are you doing?
I don't know, I could never do, you know, that TM stuff, transcendental meditation, I could never do that, I can't, yoga.
Some mindfulness stuff. I'm doing some right now, actually.
So, as one of the Girl Scouts, my troop voted to do staying fit, and the third part of that badge, the girls now do the activities. One girl's job was being healthy, one was being active, and then the last one we just did on Wednesday was less stress, and she did guided meditation with us, and she showed us how to make mandalas, like meditative drawing, and it was really cool. So we did all of this like mindfulness.
Coloring too.
Yeah, that is very meditative.
I go gardening, that helps me.
You like that good?
Gardening.
So, Liz, all right. Thank you for your patience tonight. We really appreciate it. We are ready to jump back in. We now have public comment. Is that what up next? Sorry. We have Linda Monak and Faith Dantowitz have signed up to speak at public comment. I'm sorry, if we pause for 1 minute, Casey is still in the building, but if we have CPACs talking, perhaps we should have her. Great. Sorry, I should have looked ahead and seen that before. We're trying so hard to keep to time. It is difficult. Do you want to do the update on the superintendent? Yes, that's a great idea.
Oh, we can come back, yeah.
Thank you. Oh, he's walking fast back though. Do you need a minute? Oh, I think she's in the elevator. I just saw her 2 seconds ago. Michael's going to give an update on the superintendent search, if that's, yeah?
So, okay. So the superintendent search process marches on. We received proposals last Friday, or Thursday. For search committee, we received 2 responses, one from McPherson and Jacobson, and the other from NESDEC, New England School Development Council. We did a preliminary review of those proposals today, and we've decided to interview both of those candidates, candidate firms, and they will be in next Monday. One interview, I believe, is at 4, and the other is at 5. Is that right, Ms. Quinn? And we'll hopefully be selecting a search firm to help us out shortly thereafter. We're also getting ready to issue sort of a formal request for folks to apply to be a part of the superintendent search public advisory committee, which is going to be made up of anywhere from, we don't have a final number, but could be 10 to 20 individuals from the community. We're inviting anyone who's interested to apply. There'll be a process. There'll be a letter or a notice that goes out hopefully tomorrow. If not tomorrow, then it'll go out on Monday, telling folks how to apply. It'll be a pretty simple process, just a letter, indicating why you want to be a part of the process. The folks who are selected will participate in the interview screening, in the resume screening of candidates, in interviewing of the candidates, and we'll be helping the members of this committee who are part of the superintendent search committee make our recommendations for finalists for candidates who will interview with the whole school committee. So it should be a fun process. Should be an interesting process. It will be a little bit labor intensive. It will be there'll be a bit of a time commitment. We're anticipating in the months of January and February maybe a meeting a week because there's a lot to do and a lot to talk about. But for folks who are interested, we'd really love to have you be a part of the process.
And then are you asking for a commitment? So you're setting that out as the expectation that it would be once a week, and you're asking individuals to make those, or is
we're anticipating that that's what we feel the commitment is going to be.
Okay.
So we want to be upfront with folks that if they want to be part of the process and review resumes and interview candidates and that sort of thing, that we're going to need them there to sort of do that in a robust way, and to do that in a complete way. So it may be a little bit more, maybe a little bit less time, but we don't, as much as we want folks, we don't want folks who can't make half the meetings. That's not going to be helpful for the process, and it won't be fair to the candidates or to the process. So we're looking forward to kicking off that process.
Is that on our website?
Not yet.
But, I mean, will it be?
Yes,
yeah,
it will
yeah,
be.
okay.
Yeah.
And then do we have an idea, have you at the subcommittee talked about how many candidates ultimately the goal is to bring forth?
There's not a set number. I think it's going to be, I think we don't want to get out ahead of our skis in terms of thinking about how many candidates we want to bring forward for preliminary interviews. We want to first focus on getting candidates to apply, and then sort of taking it from there.
The last question I had was, how about, has there been discussion, I'm sure there's been discussion about whether there would be spots on the advisory panel for different representative groups?
That's a good question. There will not be designated spots, but we are looking for a very diverse group of folks, diverse in terms of groups affiliated with the public schools that they may represent or be a part of, and all other sorts of diversity. So we are encouraging anyone who has an affiliation with any of our partner organizations to please consider applying, because we desperately want input from those folks as part of the process.
Just because I've sat in on some of the meetings, I think that there will be, even if people aren't selected, later on in the process when we do have finalists, there will be interviews with all of our what we.
That's a
Affinity groups.
Right.
So
Right.
that they can give us our partners, thank you.
That's a good point. In the last search that we did, once finalists were selected, there was an opportunity for representatives of some of our affinity groups, partner organizations, whatever you want to call them, to have a session with the finalist candidates. So even if folks aren't selected to be on the Public Advisory Committee, there will be an opportunity for that later in the process.
Okay. And for parents and community members, too.
Right, correct.
All that.
Thank you. Thank you for the update. Yes, thank you for waiting. We're now going to move into public comment.
Hello, thank you all for staying so late. We really appreciate it. And Jennifer, we should have said back to you, thank you guys, because we know you're all volunteers, except for you, Ben. You're all volunteers and are putting your time in, and we really appreciate all that you do for families in Brookline.
And it is a tremendous amount of time.
It's a tremendous amount of time. So we're here to talk to you about our students with disabilities. I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Linda Monick, and this is Faith Dantowitz, and we are co-chairs of CPAC. So we're here to talk to you about our students with disabilities. I despair that in a time where we have come so far in treating all students, all people, with respect, understanding, dignity, sensitivity, and acceptance, that we lag woefully behind in our treatment of people with disabilities. In Brookline, in the last year, we've had 2 principals tell 2 different parents that this is about civil rights, not disability rights. So I'm going to start my comments with a very brief grounding in why we need to care about disability rights and why they are indeed civil rights. I'd love to do a much longer presentation sometime in the future, but haven't had the time to pull it together yet. So in the 1940s, we'll start there, autistics, or childhood schizophrenics, as they were called, were hospitalized, institutionalized, experimented on with drugs, lobotomized, shock therapy, and even euthanized. The Nazis had no tolerance for these different children and encouraged doctors and nurses to put them out of their misery. Hundreds of thousands of children were murdered because they were different. Fast forward to the 1960s, and we're way more enlightened. Now the doctors have figured it out. The children are autistic because the parents didn't love them enough, especially the mothers. Mothers are the worst. So let's take the kids away and put them in a home institution. And while they're there, let's try shock therapy, drugs, LSD. At least we curb most of the lobotomies and I think all of the euthanasia, at least officially. So we've come a long way since then, or at least I'd like to think so. However, 2 years ago, Kaiser Health News reported that, and this is a quote from their article, teenagers and young adults with severe autism are spending weeks or even months in emergency rooms and acute care hospitals, sometimes sedated, restrained, or confined to mesh-tented beds. So perhaps there's work we still need to do. That was 2 years ago. When we talk about why inclusion is so important, it's important because these are children, and we should never tell children that they are less. We must lift these children up, and I, for one, will judge all of you on how you care for our most vulnerable students.
So we're here because we heard from a parent recently that moving RISE classes to Heath was being slowed down to give the Heath community time to adjust. To adjust? Having a single RISE class in the school offers the students in that Heath class an extremely limited cohort. Cohorts are mandated by the state of Massachusetts while doing next to nothing to right-size Runkle's RISE program. Programs like RISE are difficult to balance because you require by mandate a cohort of like peers to provide meaningful peer interaction. That's by the state of Massachusetts. While too large a program can restrict inclusion opportunities and strain resources in a public K-8, which is why we have RISE at Runkle and why we're looking to expand it. So if anyone had engaged CPAC executive in this most recent discussion, we would have said all of this and more. Once more, we heard from a parent that Pierce families wanted to move the newly situated Beep Rise classroom from Clark to Pierce. Again, this has not been discussed with CPAC, but had anyone asked, we would have said, are you crazy? Moving a Rise class is a huge disruption to these most vulnerable children, children who often do not handle change well at all. Moving them is likely to result in considerable regression for these already significantly at-risk children in the most significantly at-risk population. Even considering moving Rise to a classroom to Pierce demonstrates a shocking ignorance or indifference to the needs of our most significantly autistic children in the Brookline school community. The enormity of the Pierce building, the near future changes, the requirement to move indoors and outdoors for specials, and the enormous student body is reason enough to not put a Rise classroom at Pierce. Add in an open concept design, and this facility is uniquely ill-suited for Rise students. Does this school have a large sensory room? Does it have a dedicated and experienced BCBA with experience with the Rise population? Will Melissa Devine now be responsible for inclusion at Beep's 2 other Rise locations, Heath, Runkle, BHS, and Pierce? We are sure some of you might wonder, it's only a few Rise students. Shouldn't we prioritize the large group of general ed students over the little group of Rise kids? It is in fact not likely at all that this handful of vulnerable students will be able to learn and thrive in PSB at Pierce, in an open concept school. And that's what civil rights laws are all about, ensuring the minority groups aren't overlooked to serve that majority. That's what ADA and IDEA are all about. They demand that you protect those who are most vulnerable, those who cannot speak for themselves. We implore you to please protect our most vulnerable students. Thank you.
Do we have any other public comment tonight? Okay. I seem to have lost my agenda. Does someone have? Thank you. Okay, so we are behind schedule, so tonight we're not going to be talking about the AP Memorandum of Understanding. We have already done the update on the superintendent search. That brings us to the superintendent's report.
I'll start reading as those are being passed out. Just a couple updates. Believers in could really flower and grow and blossom. And they did it in a way like we thought they would, where it was them, the students first, not controlled, not organized, not controlled or not influenced by the adults in this case, but guided and supported. And that does take an incredible balance, as Jean Thompson Grove talked about, and it's a real commendation to their leadership of our students. As well as, of course, the tremendous work that Believers in Change continue to do. So continuing, DESE just this week, the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education came for their annual audit of our circuit breaker claims. We talked a little bit about this tonight already, but I'll just reiterate. The circuit breaker program recently completed an audit of PSB's circuit breaker claims. The circuit breaker program is one of the major funding sources for the special education budget. The program reimburses local school districts for a portion of their special education costs above a certain threshold for educating severely high-needs special education students. Linda Kirby, Office Manager in the Office of Student Services, has been overseeing the circuit breaker program for 16 years. Her meticulous work combing through many student IEPs has resulted in maximized reimbursements to the district. The total reimbursement we have received over the last 16 years through this program is $29 million. The monies that are reimbursed to us go back into funding services and programs for students in special education. The 5 members of the DESE team who visited Brookline this week to complete the audit shared their results with me, Deputy Superintendent Mary Ellen Norman, Deputy Superintendent Casey Miller, and Ms. Kirby. The team from DESE commented favorably on the number of students who are educated in district who qualify for circuit breaker reimbursement, noting that it was one of the highest numbers in the state. They also commended us for the low number of students in out-of-district placements as compared to other districts. The DESE team commended Brookline for our sustained commitment to educating our high-needs special education students in our own school district, in our own schools. I would like to extend a huge thank you to Ms. Kirby for her meticulous and thorough work in ensuring maximized funding from the state so that we can continue to run high-quality programs and provide excellent services to our students. She's also a real joy to work with, just so you know. Update on paraprofessional hiring and support. So, as you know, paraprofessionals play an important role in our classrooms across the district. Every year, the Office of Human Resources works hard to recruit and hire talented individuals to fill these positions. At this time, I want to take a moment to provide you with an update on paraprofessional hiring at this point in the school year. We have a total of 337.5 classroom-based paraprofessional positions. As of today, we have 13.5 vacancies in these positions. That's 4%. Out of the total number of paraprofessional positions, 102 of them serve in district-wide special education programs. As of today, we have 5 vacancies in these positions, which is 5%. On a related note, in terms of supporting paraprofessionals, for the second year in a row, the Office of Student Services is offering differentiated professional development for our paraprofessionals over the course of 8 early release days scheduled for grades K through 12. We have partnered with the Mass Partnerships for Youth, as well as our own in-district professionals, to provide topics relevant to paraprofessionals' daily work with students. Topics range from Para 101, how to be a fantastic paraprofessional, led by special education teachers in the district who are formerly paraprofessionals, to the impact of sensory processing on classroom learning and behavior, led by 2 occupational therapists from the district. And today, Mass Partnerships for Youth presented on the topics of cultural proficiency and also creating classroom interventions for dysregulated students. On each date, pairs can choose which sessions are most interested and relevant to their work. Many thanks to Directors of Special Education, A.D. Mole, Melissa Devine, and Emily Frank for designing and coordinating these efforts to support our paraprofessionals. Our official 2019-20 enrollment figures for the year. DESE has approved our annual October SIM submission, and so I'm able to share the attached official enrollment summary with you. As you know, our enrollment is fluid over the course of the school year. Our school population is highly mobile, and families move in and out on the district on a regular basis. However, the official October 1 numbers are important, especially for year-to-year comparisons. They are the official numbers we use both in reporting to DESE, but also in all our enrollment projections going forward. Please see attached a few notes from the chart. Our official October 1 kindergarten registration is 600 students. So our enrollment is 600 students. That's October 1 in kindergarten. We projected there'd be 603. I will let you know, just off the record, that as of today, it's 611. Just to illustrate how it goes up and down. Mostly
11 more?
611, yep, 11 more. And that's that's common. If I reported last year on November 14th, it would have been different than what we reported on October 1st as well. But just a little anecdote. The total number of elementary and high school students is 7,525. Last year, the total number of elementary and high school was 7,604. The official high school enrollment is 2,883 students. Last year was 2,101. Obviously, that's 18 fewer than last year. Just a note on that: whenever there is a construction project in any school, whether it's Brookline or any other town, you always typically see a dip in enrollment. That happened with Coolidge Corner. It's happening currently with BHS. I'm surprised, actually, in some ways, it isn't greater, considering, especially that we have them off-site, honestly, and with the cohort travel, that's going well. And also, we see that the dip enrollment is not that significant. A few more things, just the Brookline China Exchange Program. As I think you know, this is the 20th anniversary of the program. Festivities to mark this occasion are planned for Friday, January 10th and Saturday, January 11th at Brookline High School. Head of School Anthony Meyer, Deputy Superintendent Nicole Gittins, School Committee Member Barbara Scotto, and myself met with the Czech Steering Committee earlier this week to discuss the plans for the anniversary. We'll be sure to keep you informed as the details are finalized. We also are moving forward on the Pierce project. So we met earlier this week with the Massachusetts School Building Authority. And the meeting was primarily focused on the enrollment projections, which they are doing in conjunction with us. Select Board Member Ben Franco, Town Administrator Mel Kleckner, Tony Quigley from the Building Department, School Committee Member Helen Charlupski, Aaron Cooley, and myself met with MSBA staff at their offices to discuss the preliminary enrollment projections. In 2 weeks, the MSBA will send us an official letter with a projected enrollment number based on their methodology. We will need to review, approve, and sign that letter. Once that letter is signed, we'll enter into a feasibility study agreement with the MSBA. The MSBA board meets on February 13th, at which time we hope that they invite us into the feasibility study phase. We can't move into feasibility study prior to that. Once the MSBA board, or once and if the MSBA board invites us into the feasibility study phase, the owner's project manager and designer selection process can begin, not before that. As expected, they told us at the meeting that we should expect between 6 and 8 months for OPM and designer selection before we can actually start the work on the feasibility study. Those are a little bit longer than we initially expected because they're just some backups in terms of scheduling those. The challenge there is not necessarily our process, but our OPM and designer, both of those have to go in front of their staff and their not their board, but a panel rather, as part of the approval process as we select both the OPM and designer. We will continue to keep you informed as we go along. And just Pierce School Listening Sessions, we'll have 3 Pierce. Leslie Ryan Miller is hosting has scheduled 3 listening sessions for parents and families about potential move of classrooms to the Clark Road building. The first one's tomorrow, early at 7:45 a.m. You're all invited. I'll be there. And then Tuesday, November 19th at 1:30 p.m. and Thursday, the 21st at 6 p.m. And where we'll be discussing options that are under consideration at this point and how to make that move both really benefit and address needs that are district-wide as well as address the specific needs of the Pierce School. And then last but not least, continue to have meetings with parents and guardians. I met with the number of Coolidge Corner parents on November 1st, a coffee that was hosted by the PTO. We spoke about the school renaming process, the superintendent search process, and the work we are doing this year with our kindergarten teachers. My next parent coffee is Friday, December 6th at the Pierce School. Thank you for listening. Any questions about any of that? As we approach midnight?
No, that clock is just there.
It's confusing.
Yes, especially at this hour, it really is.
Feels
I've looked
like
a couple times. It feels a lot like midnight. So, yes.
2 small things that have sort of fit in with this stuff. That's why I'm saying it. I was reading in the paper that the girls' soccer team is in the semifinals, I think, or in regional sectionals. Help me. Somebody must know. No, nobody has a soccer daughter, but I read it in the paper, so I was really pleased to see that, and that the Brookline High School will be in the WGBH Quiz Bowl. And we've been there before. We were runner-ups to Lexington last year.
Great.
So.
All right, we have our subcommittee and liaison report. Ms. Dixit talked us with us by phone earlier that she was signed off. Does someone have an update they want to get from finance, or should we defer that one to next week? We have capital improvements. Ms. Charlevsky.
So, Capital met on Tuesday. We met with, on our agenda was the music school, and they are doing some significant renovations this summer to the building that was part of the agreement that we had with them. They don't pay rent, but they're in charge of maintaining and upgrading systems throughout the building throughout the 20 years of their lease. So they will be having to move out. They spoke to us about the possibility of space. We told them we have very little space in the summer, unfortunately, and the fact that their program might go, I mean, they may not be able to be back in the building if they're planning on a 10-week construction period, but they're replacing the heating system and doing all sorts of other things. The possibility of that going over might be greater, so they're looking around for space. We're also examining to see if we have any space that we might be able to rent to them over the summer. The superintendent gave us the enrollment report, part of which you got here, and basically the enrollment consultants that we've hired will be coming back to the enrollment group, the initial task force that worked with Mr. Lummis to go over their preliminary findings sometime in December. I can't remember the date. And then in 19th. And then in January, they will be coming here to give a report to the school committee. I think what has been interesting is that so far the MSBA projections that we heard at the meeting that we went to for MSBA and what we've projected are pretty close. And so it'll be interesting to see what this third party projects and if there's any differences or not.
I was on the initial call when we had with the MSBA, and I thought that they were saying that they said that they largely base their enrollment numbers on our numbers.
Somewhat, but they do their own algorithms, which are a little bit different than ours.
Okay.
So that's what they explained to us, at least. So there were some minor changes. Ms. Cooley was going to get back to them, and they were going to talk about some of the assumptions that were made. One of the biggest things that they do not include is, well, because they don't know, is any big development that might happen. And we did inform them about Hancock Village and the possibility of that bringing in substantial numbers of students. They have an algorithm for increased construction in a town.
They do allow for housing growth or housing increases based on historical the historical pattern within the community. But they did say that they also can factor in particular instances of significant developments, and that's the information they need, and that's one of the adjustments they will look at making between these preliminary numbers that they share with us and then their final ones, which we certify. They expected 2 weeks.
And then is the work that we're having done by the consultant, do these two things dovetail together? So if we receive different information when we have the consultant come in, is the MSBA interested in that information, or this is a totally separate?
I imagine they probably would be, though they will. I think we would share it with them because there's no reason not to. The consultant is looking at some other variables that they don't look at and that we haven't looked at in the past. So, I mean, a lot of it is very interesting information, and maybe I suppose we could share it with the rest of the committee, how some of the handout that they gave us.
Of MSBA?
Yeah.
I'm not thinking which handout you're talking about.
About the population projections and how they do it.
Yeah, I think we should share that when we have the final.
Final one, and that way we can look at all, that's a good idea. One thing I did ask them.
Having preliminary numbers and they change.
Sure, and you want it all out at once at the same time. I agree with that. We asked them to look at what they had projected when we were doing the Coolidge Corner School to now, and now I'm trying to remember what their response was, because they gave us the projections, and I think, I can't remember how that worked out. I'm sorry about that.
It's also something we'll share.
We'll share all of that when we get to it. I think the most important takeaway was it was a very positive meeting. They really, were working with us, wanted to hear from us. I did talk to them about the fact that the school committee has expressed a desire to keep our schools to 4 sections, and wanted to make sure they knew about that it wasn't something that they got blindsided with. They were appreciative of that and said that they will certify a number that we will work to. They would rather certify the higher one, and if we go down, so the 5 section, or they actually have a student number rather than a section number. I'm not sure why, but because they're building sections, they're not building, they're not counting students or desks or whatever. But anyways, so better to go from a 5 section to a 4 section, or 950 to 8, whatever the number is.
It's like a build to maximum number.
Right.
So if the town, if the needs change, then you could go below that, not go above it, very clear.
Okay.
So we felt that worked very well for us. Was there anything else at our meeting? I don't think so. I think that was all for capital.
Next, we have curriculum.
Actually, I'm going to talk briefly about 2 different meetings because I was not here to talk about the October one. And at the October curriculum meeting, we were looking at MCAS results, taking a deep dive with Ben and with Erin Cooley. And what we discovered, which you're not Ben, you're Ben. What they have discovered, of course, is that there are significant and very worrisome gaps in the students. And the question, of course, is how do we deal with this? The people at the committee were interested in a variety of other things. How many students were economically disadvantaged? How does the test compare with the previous version? Wondered it would be helpful for the data for the district to look across data in the various buildings, and so forth. And we continued that same kind of discussion in the meeting that we had the other day, because but the meeting the other day, we wanted to move, as the title said, moving beyond data to action, and trying to see what we can do with what we know. And that's been, that's sort of what we're trying to look into. Most of that meeting revolved around the reading curriculum and how well that was working, partly with what was happening in kindergarten, and partly with the way reading was being taught without as much emphasis on phonics as many people thought should have. Now that we've now got foundations in place, so that should change that. But the whole aspect of reading and how, as kids moved along, what skills were being asked, and all of that kind of thing, because we're having consistent problems with struggling readers. And that doesn't necessarily seem to get better from year to year, but there's no way that we're looking at those students in different ways, trying to figure out what the problem is. And, is the problem that they don't have phonics? Is the problem that the program that we're doing, the Fountas and Pinnell, is not getting at the kinds of things they need? There was some talk about the library books or all the books in the system being leveled, which many people, myself included, thinks is not a particularly good idea for many reasons. And some just discussion about ways we could go in the future. Mary Brown talked about the Foundations program at Baker and how anxious they were to get it and how much improvement it made fairly quickly. So we're hoping that now that the program has been introduced, that things will improve. We also talked a little bit about program review for middle school and how we would like to address that. I don't think we came up with many specific ideas at this point in time, but people are certainly interested in it. So I think we will move forward there. I think people feel that we have lost lots of children to private schools for those couple of years, and part of the question is, what are people looking for? What is in the best interest of the kids? What will make them thrive at that point in time? We are having another curriculum meeting on December 3rd where we will continue to look at middle school. I think there will be doing some kind of a more formal review during the year. This is just sort of the conversation leading up to it. And we are thinking that we might try to get Monica Crowley to come and talk about what she discovered about middle school when she was doing the Devo Middle School at Lincoln. We also, at this next meeting, are going to talk about scheduling. What are some of the scheduling problems and challenges that people are having, and just looking at things like block scheduling and what we might think about as we move forward, and see what's working and what effects scheduling might have on all of our many problems. And other than that, we are starting to set up the site council meetings where we're not setting up the meetings, but setting up the schedule for the meetings, because the curriculum committee always goes to a site council meeting every year. So, at each school, right. So that's in the process of being set up, and that will, be all through the year.
Just a clarification about the site council meetings. Are those for the curriculum subcommittee? Is that? Oh, they're just site council meetings, so that's the business of the whole school committee, right? Or is that's not specific to curriculum subcommittee, right? That's all I'm asking. Thank you.
Robert, what years use foundations?
I think it starts in
Kindergarten.
And it goes up to grade 2 or 3.
I think it goes up to 3. I don't know what.
We always just what we do in Brookline. Do we do it up to 3?
I don't know. That's the question. The product, I think, goes to 3.
Yeah, I think the product.
I don't know. I will find out and report back and make sure. I'll make sure Nicole reaches out to you directly. Sorry for not knowing that information.
This is my own private opinion, but I've heard people talk about students in the older grades, the 3 and 4, where there's a foundation program, and some of those students no longer need that. That's right. No, some of the students in grades 3 and 4 have really mastered phonics at that point. And so it's the kind of thing where it's very valuable. This is my own private opinion. It's very valuable in the lower grades and with children who need it. It's not necessarily a program you'd want to run through 3rd or 4th grade for kids who already are perfectly good at sounding out their words.
Kind of connected to that, and we don't have to answer this tonight, certainly, but I'm wondering what our spelling programs look like. Do we do a spelling program anymore? I mean, it's connected to phonics and word play and word patterns.
Spell checker.
Okay, I'm just wondering, well, so what I'm thinking, in 3rd or 4th grade, instead of foundations, we used to do, I'm dating myself, kind of the spelling side of that, but I was just wondering what we do these days.
I think it's something where it's word study is
Word
what it is.
study,
and then
yeah. Sort of spelling.
Right.
It's like CVCs and.
I think that's worth looking into because lots of people don't spell very well. And without spelling in school.
I did release Nicole Gittens of her responsibilities tonight and said she could go home, and I'm regretting that right now. Maybe that's a lesson for me. But as I said, with the foundation's grade, we'll also find out more about this and make sure she gets back to you. Sorry for not knowing more details at this point.
And do we have an update from policy?
Just that we are meeting on Monday at 6 o'clock. I think we are going to be talking about field trip policy, student accounts, social media or communications, social media policy, as well as it's not a policy per se, but how we handle students traveling in vehicles, in private vehicles, and town vehicles, things like that.
Did we already give an update on Lunar New Year? Did we do that on the last year?
Well, so thank you, Ms. Monopoly. So we did decide at policy that so what we considered at policy was whether or not the district should have a holiday policy, and we decided we got all tied up in knots, quite frankly, in trying to figure out how that would work, not only with holidays that may want to be considered, but with existing holidays that we've celebrated. A lot of the, it appears that holidays have been established, not necessarily through some deep analysis, but through politics and anecdotal information, not based on anything in particular. And I don't mean that in an insulting way. I think it's just historical how it's evolved over time, and trying to unravel that while and formalizing it some way could create a lot more issues than we thought was appropriate for a policy for the entire district. So we decided that the issue of what holidays should exist in a particular year should be part of the superintendent's responsibility in determining the calendar, as it has been for as long as we can remember, I think.
So in the calendar, the process of finalizing the school calendar in any given year, or when we do them, because we're doing them 2 years at a time these days, is I develop a draft and then share that with the BEU and get input from them. I mean, they have the opportunity to give input, okay, and then make adjustments if necessary at that point, and then present it to the school committee. So we completed that process this week in terms of sharing. I mean, so I shared the two drafts for this up for 2021 and 21-22 with the BU a month or so ago, and then we had discussion about it just this week. In both of those calendars, we included Lunar New Year as a Category 1 holiday, so, which is the school committee, I think, was in favor of that going to last year. The BU certainly was in favor of that. I'm certainly in favor of that. So I see no reason not to proceed. So that you'll be getting that. We have to make a couple small adjustments in the calendar, but probably dock that for December 4th for our next meeting.
I think
it's a workshop. Our next
meeting, we can vote on something, we'll vote on the calendar.
So
we're clamoring.
Right, that's been a discussion in many places. I think one of the things that maybe some new people on the committee may not be aware of in our, the reason that the superintendent spoke with the BEU about the calendar has to do with our contract, which says that teachers will come back on September 1st, or will not come back before September 1st, and that we can't go into July. I think those are the two sort of parameters. And oftentimes where the issue comes up is if September 1st and Labor Day are very far apart. So if Labor Day is the 7th and September 1st is whatever, 7 days before, you could start school before Labor Day. We do have that option to do that. It's always been a little tricky. By doing that, we do end the year earlier. Many school districts are now starting before Labor Day and sometimes giving off that Friday.
They're starting before September 1st.
Correct, and before Labor Day. And before Labor Day, both. So I don't know if it's something we want to discuss at some time or not, but go ahead.
Also in the collective bargaining agreement is just the process I described to you. That's actually in the CBA.
But that's the reason for the discussion with the BEU before the calendar goes out.
Yes. So I just wanted to say thank you for continuing to work on getting the calendars to us, and I'm very excited about Lunar New Year being on the calendars. I know many community members will also be, and students who brought it to us, which is a really important process. So I look forward to voting on that.
Anything else on committees? We're going to go liaisons, and then we'll go to new business.
Well, actually, it's a committee. The government relations, unfortunately, I had to cancel the last one. We do need to do one before, I would say, by December 10th, Ms. Coyne. Would that work? A month beforehand, before we're meeting on the 7th with our legislators?
So as long as you can vote in one meeting.
Yeah, I think we could possibly vote the legislative agenda in one meeting. I'll make sure to get it out to people ahead of time. Everybody is invited and part of the government relations subcommittee, so everybody is welcome to come. And I think we'll try for maybe before curriculum. Well, yeah, you'll maybe send it out and see where we can get at least a couple of people.
Anyone with very brief liaison reports? Okay. Is it not very brief? Is that why you were?
No, it's
lengthy liaison
report? It's definitely a liaison report, but Ben and I did go to the MASS conference, and we had a good time, and we went to a lot of sessions, and so there are things I can share along the way, but I did want you to know that all the resolutions passed in the delegate session, but I did follow through with the votes that you wanted me to do. So I'm just giving you that update. I'll do updates late as we go on about some other things.
New business. Yes.
Okay, so it has come to my attention that there has been a little bit of a circular confusion around a very specific issue, and that has to do with the question, please bear with me, about whether or not PTOs can purchase Brain Pops and Brain Pops Junior for their classes. Now, I would like to clarify that I understand that this question came before the curriculum committee, and that the curriculum committee referred it to curriculum coordinators who made a determination that that those programs were not being supported by the district. However, upon an inquiry from an educator to Mary Ellen Norman shared the policy, which is that if PTOs make a contribution to the district, the school committee may or may not accept it by vote. This has been an issue that's come up in multiple schools. I can think at least of 2 schools right now.
The need to vote by school committee or the Brain Pops?
The question of the PTOs wishing to donate Brain Pops to their schools. And there is a lot of public confusion about whether or not they may do so, because it is unclear if the school committee can accept that gift or if the curriculum coordinators and administrators can reject that gift.
I thought
You originally brought this to my attention 4 years ago. So
this has been a conversation that has been ongoing with the PTOs for at least 4 years. When I was PTO president at Baker, it was coming up then. And so I think there might be a little bit of a distinction as well. The issue, what I had heard, a lot of the issue is not so much as to whether the PTO can pay for it, but the willingness of the district to take it on and the desire of the district to take it on. And then if the district's not taking it on, then comes in whether the PTOs can pay for it. And so I think it is one issue about whether the district is would like to pay for it going forward. The district had made the decision after curriculum subcommittee that for this year, the curriculum coordinators did not want to reallocate funds in order to cover Brain Pops, and RAS Kids was the other program that was brought. And so for this year, they have made the decision that they do not want to reallocate would be the right word? Reallocate their funds or utilize funds that they have available to them to pay for Brain Pops and RAS Kids. The issue about PTOs, so technically all donations, anything the PTO pays for, should come before a school committee. And so, but whether PTOs do that, and we see them sometimes, very rarely, technically all PTO acquisitions should come before school committee.
Okay. So just to confirm, even though our administration has made the determination that the district should not support Brain Pops and Brain Pops Junior, PTOs may still continue to fund it for their schools upon our approval.
I hope this is additive here.
Should they choose to do so.
So, right, is PTOs have come to us, starting with Julie Schreiner-Oldham when she was a PTO chair, okay, saying we get requests from teachers to purchase various digital learning curriculum.
Yes.
The challenge for the PTOs, as they've explained to me numerous times, is that they actually don't want to do that because it gets them into a ongoing contractual obligation of continuing to buy it year after year, buy these licenses. I totally appreciate their desire not to buy that sort of curriculum materials, okay? And I think we've been pretty clear that we prefer that they didn't spend money on those things because they can spend their money on different things. Curriculum materials should be obligation of the district, okay? So, but it's not saying you can't do it. It's just saying that we believe that that's buying curriculum material is a district responsibility, okay? At the same time, what we also have been trying to do is get those requests for curriculum materials into the budgeting process. Okay. Typically, what has happened is two different things happen. One, there hasn't been historically real knowledge or involvement on the teacher level or team level of doing the budget and how far in advance you've got to plan to actually get something in the budget. As we know, we're planning now. Okay. What historically has happened is that by waiting until further into the year, or now at this point when licenses end, which is past the deadline for the budget process, at that point teachers have go to a sources they can find. Okay. In this case, the PTO. All right, and the PTO says yes, and then they're feel obligated. Okay. What we have said in this particular case this year, coming to the coordinators partway through the year, this is September, October,
yes,
and saying, can we reallocate, literally, as you said, dollars to buy these specific programs, okay? We left up to their decision, okay?
Okay.
A couple things. And they said, no, not this year. Again, get it into the regular budgeting process. At the same time, they do have concerns with these particular programs as whether or not they are or either consistent or valuable or worthwhile or other things that are better that we could use, okay? That's not my expertise. Okay,
I understand.
I rely on, and we rely on the coordinators for their expertise in these areas, in specific areas. Okay, so that's just where things stand. Okay.
Can I just ask a question? I'm sorry. I really do appreciate this. I understand what you're saying, and this is very, very complicated, and it does involve multi-year budgeting processes. Yeah. And I can understand and appreciate the fact that PTOs wouldn't want a recurring substantial expenditure on their budgets year after year that's rolling over. So it sounds like if a parent-teacher community decided that they wanted to retain this functionality or move this functionality out of the PTO pod through our school improvement plans into the CI, into whatever our budgeting process is, okay, would the appropriate path be for teachers and parents to approach their site council and their principal for subsequent budgeting processes so that it could rise up to the level of the next budget?
Yeah, it's a great question. There's two paths, really. That's one path. Another path is teachers working with principals making the request, and also there's also teachers working with coordinators to make the request. In addition to that, so those are all three, I think, three different paths, right? all not typically used, very honest, or used as well as they could be, okay? In addition, I'm pretty confident, is that Nicole Gittens has said that this year we'll be developing a process for how we review and vet online curriculum, digital tools. So we have both a process for, yes, this makes sense for the district to purchase for a school or all schools, or no, it does not. So that, because what we haven't had is a process to vet and understand if these things are both valuable educationally, but also as importantly in many ways is we're very conscious, and parents are very conscious of the online tools. What information are we sharing with them? What information are they perhaps selling about our students and their usage? And so we also have to vet them for, unlike paper materials, we have to vet them for quality, but also are they abiding by regular standards of digital safety and security?
Okay, thank you. Am I correct in understanding that once parents go through this process and teachers go through this process and it rises up through whatever one of these three pathways is pursued, if there is in fact a disagreement between the curriculum coordinators and parents, teachers, or principals, that would be negotiated through a conversation between each other, perhaps between principals, educators, and curriculum coordinators collaboratively?
I just don't want to, without knowing specifically, I don't want to say yes or no.
Thank you.
Ms. Scotto.
One of the issues around paying for things has to do with equity. And these are fairly expensive computer programs. It's like $2,500 a year for. It's a lot. It's a lot of money.
At Baker, they pay almost $4,000 a year on software programs.
So it is an expense. I'm not arguing for or against it. I'm just saying it switches on that equity issue, because if Baker teachers decide to do it and another school doesn't because their PTO has chosen to spend their money in different ways, or they have less money to spend, it brings up that equity issue again. And the equity issue was very clear when we began to look at how many computers were in the system. If you recall, how many, like the small ones, not the big ones, but the iPads. And there were some schools where parents possibly had a little more money, where they had a tremendous amount of them, and other schools that had very few. So that is an issue, and I'm not saying this is for or against.
I understand, but is there an expenditure threshold? Is it $80,000? Is it $2,500?
I have no idea.
Are we ruling
expenditure?
And like for looking at equity on a school by school basis, because otherwise it does sound a little bit like we're ruling out the possibility of PTOs to purchase anything above a particular threshold, $500, $1,000, in order to maintain equity on the basis of cost.
I would doubt if there were any limit, but it was the issue that came up with the computer.
I think what happens is it comes back to us. We have to accept it. So I think we are the ones who can.
I think that's the why of why the policy is in place, so the PTO gifts would be brought before. And something, this came up at the curriculum subcommittee as we discussed software, because something that has come up very specifically with the PTOs is that some of the PTOs had said, we would like to pay for this, or we would be paying for it, or we only paid for it for one classroom, but the whole school license, but we didn't have the money to pay for it. So it was something that was discussed at the curriculum subcommittee as well, when we discussed Brain Pops and Razz Kids.
So this brings me back to my original question, which is ultimately, do we believe that the purchase of Brain Pops and Brain Pops Junior by PTOs raises an equity issue, and we wouldn't be able to support it on a school-by-school basis?
I think that what was discussed at curriculum subcommittee is that the group, I think, and there was a majority of the school committee members who were present at that meeting, was that the sentiment of the members who were present at the committee was that we would like to be able to fund this for all of the schools to help it not be an equity issue. And so that's the place that the committee was at. But we didn't have the mechanism in this moment of the budget cycle in order to be able to do something about it for this year.
I do want to say, though, as well, is you actually don't determine curriculum material decisions. That actually isn't in your purview.
But budget, we do, yes.
So
Yep.
budget I get,
Yep.
okay, in terms of what's allocated to curriculum materials, but specific ones is actually would be, you know, as we talked about in our workshops, you know, stepping into a different lane.
So I guess I would say two things. I do have concerns about equity issues. I would like to see that we have a mechanism in our budget to fund it so that we avoid equity issues, that it's just part of what we do. And I understand that there might be some discrepancies between parties about what is the best tool or the most valuable. But we're hearing a lot from educators that they find it valuable. So I think that it's worthy of conversation, because if they think it's valuable, then there should be merit to that conversation. And then there is part of our budget priorities that we have yet to vote on, but we have, one of our goals is educational technology. It's actually one of our priorities. So when I asked about what is it that we fund in educational technology, it was not necessarily any sort of digital tools that were the majority of the budget. And there may be, in fact, items within that, but the larger piece was infrastructure, as opposed to student-centered. Like, that's all student-centered, but rather it's not student interfacing technology. So just that is a budget item that we have, and it is a priority of the school committee. So hopefully it's reflected in there, or at least a conversation moving forward.
And just in addition, when we did talk about this at the curriculum subcommittee, the idea of a school district license for this versus individual schools is much cheaper per school. So there's some real economics involved and savings if we were to do it as a full district.
This might be a question that would be a Nicole question, but when we're talking about if Nicole's developing a process for how to review and vet these programs, my concerns is sometimes when we do reviews and processes, that setting up the process takes 1 year, and then there's another year that we can actually review, and then the next year we pay for. And so I'm just a little concerned with this being a conversation that started 4 years ago. If we are able to, do we have the mechanisms in place that setting up of the process, reviewing and vetting can all happen within the budget conversation, so we don't end up back here again next September?
I don't want to make promises for folks before I ask them directly. And it seems to me that this is something we've been at for a while. Scott Moore obviously would play a major role in this and knows, is fully informed of it. So I would say that I would expect that we give a process and a plan for digital tools, how we vet and then put into the budget digital tools this year. I just one last quick thing here, which is I think another piece that's super important is how do you allow for pilots? How do you allow for pilots? It doesn't has to be district wide. Just from the get-go. That doesn't make any sense whatsoever, especially for this type of curriculum material or teaching tool. So I think that's another way is how do we also within that allow for people to explore, teams to explore, grades to explore, schools to explore things and learn how good they are and get input from teachers, just like we have been doing with our math curriculum. Teachers are piloting, teachers are giving input. So the same, similar sort of approach, I think, makes sense in some ways.
Okay. Yes, Ms. Novelli.
Sorry, I don't know if I'm veering us off, but I did want to make a request for another new piece of business, which I think will be, it's really just a request for a future update, and dare I say, on food services. I don't know if that's best.
It's jinxing us.
As we were talking about something, and I was like, oh, we need to know where we are with food services.
Yeah, and
just an update on maybe it goes to finance for maybe I don't know where this rests in its first layer, but I'm not sure can we direct it there? Yeah.
Policy goes to policy. Everything always goes to policy first.
But could you reach out to the chair, because
Yeah.
she's not here at the moment, and maybe see if we could get some information.
It would be important to see how our numbers are adding up
Yeah, that's
for
what I'm
this
trying to
year.
understand. The question is about
Both the
finance.
quality and the.
Yeah, like we have a new food service director, we had a brief meeting, we haven't really heard much on how things are going as far as like the rollout of our new in-house program, and just a general update, and how are our, meals sales and our a la carte, just sort of like a financial health of the program at this time, a general overview.
Happy to do that as long as we get some bounds on exactly how many meetings we'll have those food.
So I asked for a general update. I really would like to have a minimum, one. I'm hoping it's going really well.
End of the year.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I don't want to live here.
Yes, I think that's a very helpful request.
And on that note of not wanting to live here, does anyone have any last update or any last new business? Excellent. So I believe that takes us to the end of the agenda, although again, I don't have. Okay, we're at the end. All right, thank you. We are adjourned.